This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Have you heard about the 2018 study that showed half of prenatal vitamins tested had unacceptable levels of heavy metals? No? Well, now you have. I'm Kat, mother of three and founder of Ritual, the company making traceability the new standard in the supplement industry. I remember staring at my prenatal vitamins and finding all these things I was trying to avoid. High amounts of heavy metals, synthetic colorants, and unnecessary ingredients. So, at 4 months pregnant, I quit my job and started Ritual because I believe that all women deserve to know what they're putting in their bodies and why. I'm so proud of our prenatal vitamin. The ingredients are 100% traceable, it's third-party tested for microbes and heavy metals, and recently received the Purity Award from the Clean Label Project. You see, we trace like a mother because, let's be honest, no one cares quite like a mother. But don't just take my word for it. Trace for yourself with 25% off at ritual.com/podcast.
We made this.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I am Tony Black, and this is a short intro for a reopen file that we're giving you today, talking about the third episode of Season 5, Unusual Suspects, which was recorded in 2019 by Sarah Blair, hosting, and guest Darren Mooney, full of insight as always. And this is because the month of October, if you're listening to this in October 2023, is semi-officially Lone Gunmen month, as we're going to be talking about the Lone Gunmen TV show, and we're going to be talking about Season 9's Jump the Shark. So it seemed like a perfect opportunity to re-air the two Lone Gunmen episodes. And this is the first one, Unusual Suspects, the origin story set in 1989 for the gunmen coming together and focusing on Byers' sad love story with Suzanne Medeski.
Did you know a 2018 study showed half of prenatal vitamins tested had unacceptable levels of heavy metals? I'm Kat, mother of three and founder of Ritual. When I was 4 months pregnant, I couldn't find a prenatal I could trust, so I created my own. Ours is made traceable, third-party tested for heavy metals, and recently earned the Purity Award from the Clean Label Project. But don't just take my word for it. Get 25% off at ritual.com/podcast.
And this was a great discussion that Sarah and Darren had as part of the Season 5 coverage originally, where they get into all kinds of things, as you can imagine, and dig into a really, really interesting episode. So just seemed like a good opportunity to remind people of that conversation and of that episode as we work our way through the history of the gunmen, if you like. So I'm going to turn it over now to Sarah and Darren for the Xcast coverage of Season 5's Unusual Suspects.
Hi, this is Dean Haglund. I'm Langley from the X-Files, and you're listening to the Xcast.
Welcome to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Sarah Blair, and today I'm joined by author of Opening the X-Files and friend of our cast, Mr. Darren Mooney. Hi, Darren.
I like my middle name. It's Darren H. Mooney. Thank you for that. I'm good. How are you, Sarah?
I'm good. So, in case you haven't noticed before, we have, if you're on our special Patreon group or on the X-Files basement, we have special nicknames that we chose that have to do with the episode, like puns on the episode. So you're Hell Mooney, I'm Oublerette.
Which is quite good. And and I quite like Hell Money, as I think anybody who's listened to the episode will attest.
Yes. Yeah. So we have fun. Good times. And today we're going to have fun chatting about the third episode of Season 5, Unusual Suspects. Can you believe we're talking about Season 5 already, Darren?
We're almost halfway there. Well, I mean, I think in terms of episode count, we are pretty much halfway there, right?
Yeah. It's amazing.
Which is frightening and terrifying, and it is amazing.
Yeah.
But it's also like, where the hell is the time gone?
It's been amazing, yeah.
But it's okay, because we're going back to 1989, so we can just start all over again, apparently.
Exactly. Yes, this is a throwback episode to 1989, where we find out how the Lone Gunmen met. They assist a mysterious woman who claims the government has plans to use civilians in a secret experiment. This episode was written by the illustrious Vince Gilligan and directed by the prodigious Kim Manners. This is quite a team.
It's a great team. It's a really, really good team. And in fact, I would argue that Unusual Suspects is sort of massively underrated and overlooked in the context of the show's run. When you look at the sort of talent working on it, I suspect there's a good reason for that, because obviously Gilligan's masterpiece, as it were, is, what fandom would consider to be one of Gillian's masterpieces, is waiting just a little bit later in the season with Bad Blood, for example. And even Folie à Deux, which is towards the end of the season, is also like an underappreciated Gilligan script. But it does feel like Unusual Suspects doesn't really get the sort of love that it deserves, because it's a wonderfully crafted piece of television. It's phenomenal. I really, really love it.
I love it too. It's so good, and it's fun, and there's so many great things about it that I can't wait to talk about with you. But let's check the IMDb ratings. At the time of this recording, it's an 8.6 out of 2,518 votes. Do you agree with that? Because sometimes IMDb is a little off here or there, but
that seems relatively okay. Now, keep in mind that I don't really have a point of comparison. So, do we know what the score of, say, Redux is? Just to give us a sense of scale. Redux is 8.8 and Redux 2 is 9.2. So, wow. I mean, I'm not entirely sure that I would put Unusual Suspects in a relative position of 8.6 with that. But I think with 8.6, I'd be relatively content with that. It's not a 7, it's above 8.5. So yeah, I think I can live with that,
Yeah, I definitely would probably agree with an 8.6. I think that's a pretty good rating. So, do you want to, I'm really excited. Do you want to dig into the episode breakdown and get started?
Let's do this thing.
So in our teaser, we have I love that they make this very clear. This is 1989.
It's not one of those idents. Yeah, it's not one of those idents down the bottom of the screen. Yeah. It's like, no, 4 gigantic letters, 4 gigantic numbers on the screen. There is no way that you could assume that you are coming off the back of Redux 2. And it's like, well, Mulder's had a very eventful week, apparently. Great haircut. And apparently lounging around in a warehouse in Baltimore. No, it's 1989.
Yes, we don't even know where we are. There's like a SWAT team. They're doing a sting. And we see a bunch of random stuff. We hear some groaning. It sounds like Mulder. Yeah.
They're here.
And he's like naked, basically.
See, this episode is something for everybody.
Duchovny fans rejoice. It's kind of cool because I noticed it was in Fells Point. I was like, oh, I've been there. I used to live near there. So that was exciting. Then we see the Lone Gunmen and Mulder, and you're like, what's going on? You think it's an effective teaser? You think it's...
Oh, it's a great teaser. It's a fantastic teaser because it's so incongruous. Because again, like it's one of those nice high stakes sort of, and it does feel a little bit like a sort of mythology episode opening, where you sort of open in action and there's lots of men with guns. There's a police squad. Somebody's been called out to a SWAT team. Somebody's been called out to a warehouse, which is where all sorts of crazy crap always happens on the X-Files. And they sort of swarm in, and your first surprise is that like it's not Mulder or Scully that's there. It's not the cigarette smoking man. It's the Lone Gunmen, who, don't necessarily, obviously they've been on the ground in episodes like Apocrypha, where they went ice skating, for example. But, this is an entirely new context to see the Lone Gunmen in. Surrounded by men with guns and firearms and in the middle of a scene that looks to be a little chaotic. And then you get the sort of the kicker on top, which is, the voice that you've been hearing off the corner of the screen saying, they're here, is naked Mulder. Which is, I'm not a huge fan of, in media res openings. I think Unrequited in the 4th season is a really bad example of, an attempt to open in media res to give the audience an image that they want to process and to hope that they're interested enough to watch how the rest of the episode gets to that point. But this is an example of how you do that right, because the image is just so bizarre and so strange and so outside any context in which you could normally place these characters, you know, that it works, and it works beautifully.
It really does, because you want to know more. You're like, okay, what are the Lone Gunmen doing in 1989 in a warehouse with naked Mulder? Like, it's very effective, because I definitely wanted to stay tuned for that. So then in scene 1, we've got Byers looking at his inked fingerprints, which, if you know the Lone Gunmen, that's kind of a big deal that they've been fingerprinted, and they're on file now. But and I think my favorite part of the scene was when Langley calls him doohickey instead of frohickey, and they're all just arguing and fighting.
I really like, this is one of the things that's really great about the Lone Gunmen, and I think the episode sort of channels that very, very well. But it's something that's been true since like the very beginning, going back to EBE, which is like, Mulder is this character who is defined by angst. And I mean, he's wry and he's funny and he can be goofy and playful, but he's like defined by this really tragic story. And I mean, to an extent, Byers gets his own tragic story here. But in context, the Lone Gunmen are allowed to be a lot sillier, a lot goofier, and to behave basically to some extent, like kids who never really grew up. Because I mean, the exchange between Byers and between Langley and Frohickey here, the doohickey remark, and the somewhat ill-advised joke about prison rape, which is a little uncomfortable and hasn't aged particularly well, but it sort of frames the discussion as like kids in the playground. In a way that kind of lets you know that despite the fact that, you know, you opened with a SWAT team raiding a warehouse, and despite the fact that you saw Mulder on the ground naked, these are still the Lone Gunmen that you know and love. They're still the weirdos. They're still eccentric, and they're still playful, and they're still goofy. And like, even in police custody, even after being arrested and fingerprinted, they're still behaving in a way that you sort of expect of these characters, which I really, really like as sort of an establishing beat in the episode. Also, doohickey is just a great insult.
It really is. So then we've got Richard Belzer playing John Munch, and he takes Byers to interview. Why do you think he chooses Byers out of the three? Like, is it hard to guess at all?
Byers is clearly the protagonist of the episode, and if you want to get the story of the episode, you got to go to Byers. Byers. You got to go
to the narc, right?
Hey, this guy worked with the FCC. I mean, they're very good with communications, right? You want to you want to communicate what's going on very, very well. And like, actually, it is worth noting, like, the decision to center the episode around Byers is an ingenious choice. Like, I mean, obviously the Lone Gunmen are three characters and they're three very distinct archetypes. But I mean, the thing is that Langley and Frohickey are, and I love all three of them very, very much, but Langley and Frohickey are very much like, you look at them and you immediately know their deal. It's like, you know that Langley is like this sort of punk rocker, Ramones loving. It's not a surprise later in the episode when he turns out to be playing Dungeons and Dragons. He has that sort of like, his appearance and the way that he's played by sort of Dean Hagland communicates a lot about him. Similarly, Frohickey, where Frohickey is this sort of like slightly grungy, slightly creepy older man who wears fingerless gloves, and that sort of tells you a lot about Frohickey as a person. Byers, in his suit with his beard, which is very neatly trimmed and maintained, is more of a mystery. And so it's a very shrewd decision to have the episode sort of explore, to look through Byers' perspective, to treat him as the anchor character, because Byers is the one who is, and again, like, I think all three of them are great, but Byers is the one who is, like, based on his physical appearance, hardest to reduce down to a stereotype, or to get characterization from like what he looks like as opposed to who he is, which means that there's more interest in digging into kind of who he is.
Absolutely. And as an origin story, it's fascinating because you already know Byers from the show, and he's so paranoid and he's so, you know, knowledgeable about all these things to do with, you know, government conspiracies and everything. And you're like, how did he even get there? Because his appearance doesn't match that paranoia. And so it's really cool to be able to see exactly how he got there in this episode. And I really like that about it. So, yeah. And then we've got one of my favorite lines from the scene. Richard Belzer says, and he's an FBI agent who likes to take off all his clothes and talk about space aliens. Like, how much of a perfect description is that for Mulder? basically.
It does, and in 1989, I mean, there's a reason that that Munch is one of the most consistently reliable detectives ever to work in law enforcement, if we are to believe television, having a career that spans like 2.5 decades. He's got a great read, fantastic read on Mulder. What I actually do, I should point out, I love the use of Munch here, because obviously Munch is, for people who are not familiar with him, he's a character who is a TV institution. He obviously started out in Homicide: Life on the Streets, and then he went to Law and Order SVU and stuff like that, and he's become like this sort of like cultural icon where he pops up in all sorts of interesting places. This is one of the early examples of like Munch sort of popping up across the TV landscape, but he pops up in stuff like, for example, in Sesame Street, he's involved in the Special Numbers Unit. If you go to stuff like Arrested Development, he's working undercover, I think, at a university. If you go to stuff like The Wire, he's drinking at the cop bar in Baltimore, the same cop bar where all the characters from The Wire are working. And I mean, on top of that, he's crossed over into shows like St. Elsewhere. So he's one of the key sort of like, if you wanted to put a linchpin through 20th century American television, Munch would be a character that would allow you to do that. And it's kind of like, I think that the joke is that, like, the way that actors have a Kevin Bacon number, like, which is how many steps you have to go before you can get from like Leonardo DiCaprio to Kevin Bacon. All characters in fiction television have a John Munch number, which is like how many crossovers you have to get to before you can get back to John Munch. And I think that there's something very clever in that. And I like the way that Gilligan ports him over, because I think Gilligan was saying, like, I was just writing this episode, turned out to be set in Baltimore. It's like, who works in Baltimore? John Munch, and I'll write him into the script and see if Belzer wants to do it. But it sets up something interesting in Gilligan's writing later on, because Gilligan, more than I would argue any other writer on the X-Files, right? But the X-Files obviously is a groundbreaking piece of television, and it redefined a lot of what television could be in the 90s. We talked a bit earlier on about like the about like the mythology episodes as like bringing cinematic storytelling to weekly television, which is astounding. But a lot of the influences on the X-Files, particularly say on Carter, on Darren Morgan even, tended to be like either literary or cinematic. Like, we're coming off Redux, which is this huge ode to the filmography of Oliver Stone. Like, you have that montage that's literally lifted from JFK and stuff like that. But even think about, for example, the opening scene of Jose Chung's From Outer Space, which riffs on Star Wars. Or even like the mythology, where it's kind of cobbled together from Oliver Stone and Star Wars and Steven Spielberg and stuff like that. What makes Gilligan interesting, and I think it really kicks off with Unusual Suspects, and you can see it later on in episodes like, for example, his script for Drive, which opens with a sequence that is modelled on the O.J. Simpson car chase. Most obviously in episodes later on like X-Cops, which is very clearly modelled on the TV show Cops, for example. In his failed pitch for an episode that would have been based around Unsolved Mysteries, which was one of the episodes he wanted to develop around here. So he wanted to do it for, I think, either this or for Bad Blood later in the season. But you have the sense, or even Hungry, for example, which is a monster story from the point of view of the monster. There's a sense that Gilligan understands television and is very engaged with television as an art form in a way that many of his contemporaries weren't. So you have, like, while writers like Carter and Spotnitz and Morgan are influenced by film and they're drawing on film, Gilligan is more eagerly drawing on television. And it's very telling, for example, when he points to his inspirations for, like, big episodes. He doesn't point to the obvious films. So when people go to Bad Blood, the instinctive comparison is, Bad Blood it's Gilligan doing Rashomon, that classic Akira Kurosawa film. And if you ask Gilligan what he was doing there, he's like, no, I was doing the Mary Tyler Moore show or the Dick Van Dyke show. I was doing the one where the roof fell in. That's the episode I was doing. And like, you go to Drive, for example, and everyone's like, Drive is very clearly ripping off Speed. It's doing Speed, but for the X-Files. And Gilligan will say, no, I'm not doing that at all. I'm doing Homicide: Life on the Street, the episode where Vincent D'Onofrio got caught beneath a train. And so, like, Gilligan is very literate in the form of television. And it's kind of like, it's interesting to see that here with the casting of Munch, who is like a patron saint of television. And it's kind of, I think that says a lot about Gilligan as a writer and how he approaches the show. And I think in part what makes him so good is the fact that he's writing for this art form, which at the time, people only really started to consider TV as an art form in relatively recently. Like, we've discussed the canon, the idea of the canon. I think I talked with Todd Vanderwerf about this. How about, like, for many people, the idea of television being something more than disposable entertainment began with The Sopranos in 1999. But, like, Gilligan genuinely has a love for the history of television as an art form. And I think that, like, the casting of Munch here is a really, really nice little nod to that. Well, for me, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. That all makes sense. And I mean, it just makes me love Gilligan even more. Like, I'm such a huge fan, and I just gush over him all the time, I know, but yeah, he's pretty amazing. So I think it definitely adds a lot to this episode. You're right. And then in the next scene, we've got a flashback within a flashback, essentially. So we're just adding the layers here, making it even more meta. And we meet, Byers meets, and we as an audience meet Suzanne Modeski, played by Signe Coleman. I hope I pronounced her name right. Sorry, Miss Coleman. And they're at a convention, and he's intrigued by this mysterious woman, and we don't actually know that her name is Suzanne Modeski yet. She doesn't say who she is. She's just very mysterious and intriguing, and he follows her around, and Frohicke's like, "Hello, pretty lady." Like,
because of course Frohicke is. Yeah.
Because every lady to him is pretty, and and it's Frohicke, classic Frohicke. And then we've got he's trying to sell her a bootleg cable thing, and then Langley's coming up from his little booth next to him. He's like, no. And they just start fighting over bootleg cable, because of course. And then Byers bumps into this mysterious mystery woman, and she drops her purse, and a picture of a little girl falls out. And I just love how awkward and adorable and precious he is right here in this scene. It's so sweet, because he's just like, he's really intrigued by this woman, but he's Byers, and he just can't help but be adorable.
And there's something very innocent about Byers, particularly as he's portrayed here, because he's genuine. He's a member of the SCC. He's introduced as a narc, as I think Langley calls him as well. Later on, when Mulder shows up, he's like, I think we share a credit union. Like, Byers is a man who works in a very boring, very dull bureaucratic job. And he talks about in his voiceover how much he actually believes in what he's doing in terms of like communicating to the American people. Like that wonderful shot of him offering a button to the two sort of punks who are walking by saying, sort of cram it, narc. And just the look of dejected disappointment on his face when they don't take a button. Like, there's something so wonderfully innocent about Byers as he's introduced here. That's sort of, and again, it's a great performance from Bruce Harwood, who has this incredible sort of vulnerability that he plays, where he really looks like if a puppy had a beard and a nice suit, it would look like Byers. It's incredibly sweet and very, very effective.
Absolutely. And I think it makes his transformation all the more valuable, because he does go from this innocent, like, genuine guy to this paranoid, thing that he ends up as. So, yeah. I think it's really well written there and well played by Bruce Harwood. So, yeah. And then we've got Byers and this mystery woman are talking about her backstory, and she spins this very elaborate tale about how she's looking for her little girl who's been kidnapped, and he goes and says, if you want, I can go online. I really love how he delivered that. He's like, I can go online and try to find out for you.
It was a novelty back in like 1989. It was like, it's like I have a Ferrari. It's like I can go online. Not everybody can go online, but I can go online. That's where I'll go. You just gotta drop it in there. It's casual, It's just sort of like trying to impress her. It's like, I mean, I bet you don't know a lot of people who can go online, right?
Exactly. So it's very, very impressive for him. And then she says her name is Holly, and he goes, "Oh, just like the sugar, right? Yeah."
Oh, Byers, you were adorable.
What a coinkydink.
Yeah. What Amazing. Are the odds? Yeah. And you're just like, Byers, you were adorable. I want to take you home.
Bless.
I'm not sure you should be out in public, but it's great.
So, in the next scene, they go online together. And
Poor Ken. Poor Ken. He just wanted to play Dig Dug. And then all of a sudden, Byers shows up and he gets dragged into this big conspiracy. I mean, does anybody really, like, I want to see The Unusual Suspects, but from Ken's point of view, where he's just playing Dig Dug, he takes a break, and then he gets arrested.
too. It wasn't me. I swear it wasn't me.
Yeah. I just want to play Dig Dug. I was working on a high score.
Exactly. So they kick poor Ken off the Dig Dug, and then they look up this address that she has, this online URL. And it goes to the Department of the Defense, and poor Byers is completely horrified. He's like, I work for the FCC. This is what we're trying to stop. But, oh, man. So I just love this whole sequence. It's just priceless. And she's about to leave, but he really wants to impress her so much. So sweet. He just really wants to, like, help her and, you know. So she asks him to look up the name Suzanne Modesky. She says it's her daughter. And this magical encrypted file comes up, and they print it out. And I love how anxious she is when she's trying to get the printout. She's like, come on. Like, has any dot matrix printer ever worked that fast before? Let's be real. That was pretty quick.
I feel like, you know, I mean, now, like, the issue is you've only got 45 minutes of television. I mean, now what you would do is you'd have, like, a 75-minute extended episode, which is The Usual Suspects, where a solid 30 minutes in the middle would just be Suzanne Modesky waiting for the printout to happen, getting a cup of coffee, coming back, it's still not done yet, you know, and generating massive tension. We're talking 3 act breaks in here.
Exactly. So, let's see. Oh, and she mentions yet again that her ex-boyfriend is a-psychotic. He's not just psychotic, he is a-psychotic. And I swear, if, like, we took a drink every time they said the word psychotic, I think we'd be on the floor at this point. Let's be real, because it was a lot.
It was.
They made it very clear that this ex-boyfriend is a-psychotic.
How would you describe his mental state, Sarah?
He is a-psychotic. Take a drink.
Which is great.
I'm drinking coffee right now. It should be Bailey's, but we've got coffee going on.
And it's great. It does give you one of the great cuts or jokes in the episode when you actually see who the ex-boyfriend is.
Dun, dun, dun. Plot twist.
It's Mulder, listeners. Who hopefully have seen the episode, so that's not really a reveal. But yes, it is. It turns out to be Mulder. She's claiming Mulder is her ex-boyfriend.
Can we just take a moment to, since Scully's not in this episode, I just have to give a shout out to Mulder's hair in this episode.
It's so 80s.
Oh, it's beautiful. So lustrous. And just gorgeous 80s hair.
I remember reading this article, I think from Kurt Anderson when he was writing for Vanity Fair, and he was making the observation that, like, men's fashion, like, fashion in general seemed to stop around, like, 1987, 88. And, like, fashion is pretty consistent between 88 and the present day. Like, this is arguably one of the reasons the X-Files work so well, which is excusing things like the really baggy suits in the early seasons. Like, you can watch the X-Files. Shoulder pads and Scully's long coats. But like, Scully basically looks like she gets into an Iron Man costume. It's just made of soft fabrics. But I mean, it's sort of like ignoring stuff like that in the early seasons. You can watch the X-Files and they look relatively similar to how they look today. Like, Mulder's wearing the same sort of suits that he could easily have been wearing in, like, 1995, 96. And even here in 1989... Like, Mulder is better dressed in 1989 than he was in 1993 and 1994.
I know.
But I love that the only real marker of the passage of time is Mulder's haircut, which is quite nice. It's a lovely little touch from the production team.
Absolutely. And we get to have Mulder and Frohicke's first interaction together, which is classic, priceless. And I just love the interaction between these two. It's always so great.
I mean, one of my favorite moments in the X-Files is, like, I think it's in 3 words where Mulder, obviously spoiler, comes back after being away for a very long time for reasons that I won't articulate. But like, he comes back and he meets the Lone Gunmen, and Frohicke just hugs him, and it's a beautiful shot because, you know, obviously Tom Braidwood is not a very tall person, and David Duchovny is a very tall person. and it's like Dad just came home from a really long business trip. It's adorable. It's one of my favourite shots in the show, and it captures that wonderful weird dynamic that Frohickey and Mulder have that runs through that you've already seen in earlier episodes with them, but which I think that exchange quite nicely captures.
And it's like, how do you go from this to a redwood among oaks? Yeah. So then Byers enlists the help of Frohickey, and we kind of get like a couple of cuts back and forth between the interrogation. Is it an interrogation? Not really. Because he's like, okay, so let's talk. And Byers just completely spills the beans. There's no interrogating there. He just like gives it all up.
Munch is having a light day. It's like, well, This is normally my role in this is a bit more aggressive and assertive. I'm just going to make a couple of snarky one-liners and you just keep going.
Right, exactly. So I'll just wait while you talk and tell us the story. So then Frohickey says he can decode the files, and because his kung fu is the best, and he and Byers decide to go do something about Mulder, and then Mulder's just a complete dork and a half, and they follow him down a back hallway at this convention center, and he gets the drop on him, and they say they're looking for the bathroom.
Which is great. Again, like, it's the wonderful lone gunman sort of thing, where they're not really, like, the lone gunmen are very much not designed to operate in this world, and that's kind of part of what makes them so adorable, is the fact that they have their own little sort of warehouse or sort of space where they live, but you can't really imagine them wandering in and actually surviving in a show like The X-Files. And it's like where even Mulder gets the drop. And Mulder, who is traditionally like whacked over the head with heavy objects on a nearly weekly basis, if Mulder can get the drop on you, you should just sort of call it a day and go home. But I absolutely do. But that kind of captures a lot of the appeal of the Lone Gunmen, is that they're kind of like, they're losers, but they're losers who don't let the fact that they're losers stop them from trying. And it's hard not to sort of like warm to that and admire that and kind of love that. And I think the episode sort of captures that very, very well, because it's like Mulder doesn't even realize he's playing the same game as these guys and he's still beating them handily. You know?
For once. Yeah. And so he shows them this picture of this woman, and they deflect very artfully. And then Mulder answers his giant phone.
1989 phone. Again, another subtle marker of the era.
I don't even know where they found that, to be honest. It's just brilliant. And who is on the phone, Darren, that we recognize from season 11? Spoiler.
Reggie something. Oh, okay. I was, I'm quite a big fan of Reggie from season 1 as well. From what was the one? Is it Lazarus or Born Again? It's one of those, like, there's a case where the guy came back from the dead. And I'm like, and it's great because you say, like, it's from that season 1 episode where the guy comes back from the dead and avenges himself on people who've wronged him. And you're like, that's 6 episodes.
Yeah.
You can't
exactly
actually narrow it down. It's the one with the criminal who just stares at Mulder really creepily in court. Young at Heart, I think.
Okay, which could also be several episodes.
Yes.
Tombs.
Yeah.
Can we say Tombs here? Yeah.
We can say Tombs here.
Let's just say first season.
Late first season. The point where people are like, yay, we got a show that works. And it's like, so you realize you need to make 12 more episodes. And they're like, oh.
Exactly. So, yeah, I love that. Do you think, like, Reggie is just, like, who is Reggie? Reggie something. Like, clearly he's important. So... Somebody in the show knows a Reggie, and it's just one of those names that they have a toss out that they always use.
I do suspect Gillian intended it as a shout out to the first season, because I think it happens again in another flashback episode. I think there's another mention of Reggie as well, and I wonder if Morgan's selection of, like, Reggie something was a way to allow him to use clips like that from it.
Yeah.
But
and the name Holly is used a couple of times too. Isn't Gillian married to Holly?
That is indeed Holly.
Yeah.
Holly is his long-term girlfriend. At least I don't know if they got married since.
Okay.
But what he was working on the show, his long-term girlfriend was. So, for example, she popped up in Pusher as well. And Holly here as well is used in that sort of context as well. So it's one of those great names.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, it is harder to shout, Holly, 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 in the same way that you would with Reggie.
Holly something just doesn't quite
doesn't
have the
roll
same
off the
ring.
tongue.
Yeah. So we've got poor Ken. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Reggie Perdue is also mentioned in Paper Hearts. That's the other Gilligan episode I'm thinking of.
That's right.
Yes. So yeah, Gilligan, again, this is Gilligan being very literate in television, but he was a big fan of the X-Files before he was on the writing staff, so you can tell that he's like, let me insert these little continuity references. Nobody remembers, like, Mulder's former boss or partner from the first season episode that we can't even remember the names of, which, by the way, is young at heart, it turns out. But it's like, he's like, I'm going to include a reference to that in, like, 2 of my most popular episodes, which is, I kind of admire the attention to detail there.
Absolutely. He was just setting it all up for season
for Darren
11.
Morgan, to sort of hit it out of the park.
Exactly. It's just, pitching a swing right there, knocked it out. Yeah. So, then we've got poor Ken, and they come back and find out he's being carted away by a bunch of military police goons. And Byers is like, no, it's me. It's me. I did that. And Frohicke's like, dude, no. Ixnay on the open stay there. Like, can you not? So, even right away, Frohicke's got his back. Or maybe he's just trying to cover his own ass.
I can't imagine Frohickey would be particularly, like, if Frohickey wasn't standing nearby, he would probably be like, that's an interesting story that happened there. I don't imagine Frohickey would be like, no, they took the FCC rep. The poor FCC rep.
Oh, bless. And so we find Langley shouting at a bunch of these guys about putting in $50. And you think they're, like, playing a really intense poker game or something. But let's be real, it's the Lone Gunmen. So, Dungeons and Dragons, it is. And he's Lord Manhammer.
Of course he is.
Lord Manhammer would demand $50 from these guys, absolutely. Yeah. And then they try to get his help, and he needs to get Frohickey to say something important, which is, your kung fu is the best.
I feel like that it's a wonderfully earned character moment. It's one of those great sort of, because you get the animosity between the two so effectively, and you get Frohickey's arrogant boast earlier in the episode that my kung fu is the best. So it's a wonderful little payoff between the two. Like, I really like that, like, despite the fact this is Byers' story, this is very much driven by Byers' sort of perspective, it finds something for Frohickey and for Langley to do, and to give them, like, their own little sort of arc and their own little payoff within there as well. It's just very, very well structured.
Absolutely. And then we've got Langley doing his hacking stuff, and Byers is freaking out. And I was just sitting here watching this thinking how much I miss Langley and how much I'm glad that he was able to come back in season 11. But in some form. But I just really love these characters so much. They're just, classic X-Files. And there's no way the X-Files would have been the X-Files without these guys. And then he mentions that he changed his driver's license so he could handicap park for his tinnitus.
Of course he could.
It's just horrible. But this is 1989.
Yes,
and
very
we're not
in keeping
as educated and sensitive to those things at that time. But they look up Mulder's FBI profile, and they're like, oh, accommodations out the yin-yang.
This guy is going places. He's going right to the top.
Right?
Yeah. He's going to be sitting in a big office at the top of the FBI building in a couple of years. Mark my words.
Oxford educated. He knows his stuff.
Yep. Violent crimes. This is the future of the FBI.
Climbing that ladder.
Yep. There's no way he'll make director by the time he's 60. It'll be astounding.
Oh, he's going to be, president.
Yeah.
And then they look up Suzanne Modesky, and realize she's not who she says she is. So you've got this, like, you know, this, like, huge juxtaposition, contrast here between Mulder's, like, brilliant, like, everything, and then Suzanne Modesky, and they're like, she is a completely dangerous and unstable human being.
Would you go so far as to say she's a psychotic, Sarah?
Possibly.
Sorry, I just got to take a sip of this Bailey's.
So, yeah. And you're like, what is going on? And I really have to stop and say Mark Snow's music is just brilliant in this episode, because he really sets the scene. And it's almost kind of like an ironic build, I think. That's the tone that I got from this. It's so overly dramatic, but in a good and effective way to build up the scene.
Yeah, and there's a number of other, like, musical cues in there as well, like where Suzanne is wandering the floor as well. You get that sort of, like, nice cue as well, which is very sort of playful. Like, I mean, Snow is very, very good at what he's doing, and it's astounding to think that he was doing it 24 times a year on the show. Like, the amount of music he produced is astounding, and the quality of that music is great as well. It makes the moment. It's so wonderfully overplayed, which is fantastic. It's like, again, it's these characters don't really belong in, like, an X-Files narrative like that. They can't really handle it. And so, like, and it's very clear. It becomes very, very clear when Suzanne grabs the pliers that these guys cannot handle it, cannot handle the narrative in which they found themselves. But the music sort of cements that. The music sort of builds up this big epic thing when these three guys figure out that they're in a room with a woman who is possibly, take a sip here, a psychotic. And the episode is like, well, this is the end of the world for these guys. They are completely outmatched. They found themselves cornered. It's like when Mulder kind of got the drop on them earlier in the episode. This is game over for these guys. There's absolutely no walking back from it. And I kind of admire, as you pointed out, I do think there's an element of irony to this thing where it's just like, dun dun dun. It's like, join us next week when we see how the Lone Gunmen will get out of this situation.
Yes. And, I mean, I just love this whole scene because they are still, you know, basically innocent, but they're starting to have their eyes open. And they're like, oh, no, who is this woman? And you can see why Byers would be so taken with her, because she's just, well, blowing his mind at this point. And it's like she's screaming about, like, how no one is safe, and look what they did to JFK, his namesake, and she pulls out the hotel Bible and, you know, is, like, screaming, and they're all like, this is crazy, what is happening? Oh, they're so scared and sweet and precious.
That's one of the things I actually really like about the Lone Gunmen, is the difference that exists between them and Mulder, right? So Mulder and the X-Files in general, I think, you could argue, a product of, like, 70s paranoia. In terms of, obviously, like, Watergate, you're thinking about the end of Vietnam. Think about how many scenes in the show take place in a car park. Mulder's first informant was named Deep Throat, obviously. The abduction of Samantha while he was watching the Watergate hearings on television. Even broader things like the fact that Mulder's a product of a broken home, which gets at stuff like no-fault divorce and the idea of latchkey kids. And so, like, the X-Files is very rooted in a 70s sense of, like, cultural paranoia and anxiety. And one of the things I admire about the Lone Gunmen as characters, kind of like outside of that, is that they exist as a kind of they exist as a subtle counterpoint. So if Mulder is a product of the 70s, the Lone Gunmen in many ways are presented as a product of the 60s. Now this gets a bit more obvious in their own show, where, like, when they get the Lone Gunmen mobile, which of course is a Volkswagen van, which is like the most 60s vehicle imaginable. But you have stuff like, I think in Via Negativa in the 8th season, you have Frohicke talking about working at, I think, Altamont, which is the famously disastrous rock concert that ended the 60s to an extent. But even here, you have stuff like Byers being named for JFK because he was born, like, immediately after the assassination and was going to be called Bertram otherwise. But, like, you have this idea that though Mulder is kind of cynical and wary, and he's got that, like, the beaten downness of the 70s, the idea that things are bad and they're not going to get better, and we were fools to trust government, or we were foolish to trust people at all, there's something almost romantic about the Lone Gunmen that feels like it kind of captures the 60s kind of alternative culture, the counterculture. And I mean, you have that with like Langney's long blonde hair, for example. I mean, he's a punk, but, you know, he could just as easily be a hippie. In fact, I suspect Frohickey has called him a hippie a couple of times over the course of the episode. Frohickey himself seems like that sort of like dirty old man who would have been working in the counterculture in the 60s. And like, so you have this idea of like, they're much more innocent than Mulder are, and than Mulder is, and there's something very touching about that. There's something very kind of affecting in the idea that, like, while Mulder is shaped by, like, the cynicism, pessimism even, and nihilism that sort of defined America's vision of itself in the 70s, the Lone Gunmen sort of hark back to a time in the 60s when, you know, it was weird, we didn't really trust the government, and we believed in outlandish conspiracy theories like Gideon Bibles being used to track and record conversations in hotel rooms because nobody questions them. But they also have, like, a much more romantic and much more idealistic view. Like, it's telling that Mulder is tracking down Samantha, who we discover, like, even if he finds her now, she's never going to be the same girl who was taken, because that was, 1973. That was decades ago. She'll at the very least be profoundly changed by everything that's happened. In contrast, Byers is chasing, like, Suzanne Modesky, who is, like, just a woman with whom he is in love. And she's already, like, you can't imagine her changing much. You can't imagine, like, there's still hope that maybe Suzanne and maybe Byers can have a happy ending. And I mean, that's for a future episode of the show, maybe, to explore. But there is something kind of hopeful, almost, in the way that Byers pursues Susan that's like more optimistic than the way that Mulder is chasing Samantha, if that makes sense. Even like knowing what we know about Samantha in hindsight.
Yeah. So, I mean, tell me the truth. When you go to a hotel, do you check the Bible?
Do I shake it and see if it falls out? Actually, I don't. We don't really have that tradition here in Ireland, actually. So
really?
We don't. Now, I don't generally search all of the drawers in my hotel, but I haven't found a Gideon Bible there. We do have a phone book occasionally, and I have been known to leaf through that, if only because phone books are it's very strange to hold a phone book in this day and age.
What is a phone book?
Oh, okay, cool. So a phone book is like, it's a listing of every number, private and commercial. So it'll have like, so if you want to find out, so if I want to find out where Sarah Blair lived, or if I want to call Sarah Blair, let's say I met you and I want to talk to you, I would open this, a gigantic, it's a big block of a book with yellow text. It's printed on really crappy paper because they're so thin, because you have to have so many pages. And I'd literally search for Blair, Sarah, and it would give me your phone number and possibly your address as well. We lived in more innocent times in the 90s.
Fascinating. Do your fingers do the walking?
Yes, they do. But yeah, so it's kind of weird that, like, kind of like when I go to a hotel now, they still have those. Obviously, they're much smaller because nobody's private information's in them anymore. They're just local businesses. But it's like nostalgia. It's like when you hold a vinyl album. It's like, this is how people used to live, you know?
The smell. Oh.
Yeah.
I love the smell of a phone book. And it's sad because, before, if you enjoyed listening to anyone's voice, like I love Stephen Fry, I would say I could listen to him read the phone book. And now I can't say that anymore. It's like I could listen to him
read my contacts list.
Google search results. The end of an era.
Yeah.
Yep. I love the part where they have they're translating this encrypted file. And it's like, this biological weapon is located at this address and this box with this number on it right here. Yeah. There's nothing vague about it in this encrypted memo because it's encrypted. So why would you need to worry that anyone could possibly hack it?
If you've ever worked in like a bureaucratic organization, you know that like de-encrypting the memo is like just one step in trying to understand what the hell is going on inside it. It's like there'll be an appendix, there'll be like, so it'll have like tables of data, and it'll be like in one of the footnotes, there'll be a mention that, oh, by the way, we're doing a trial in Baltimore. I love that they just unpack it and it's just like, boom, everything you need to know is right here. If anybody were to de-encrypt this, this is the one piece of information they'd like. I mean, people joke about, like, big government and being overly bureaucratic, but there's something sort of romantic in the idea that, like, the government runs conspiracies where the memos literally consist of the one thing you need to know about what's happening right now.
Yes. So at least we understand where the Fells Point thing comes in and why they're in that warehouse. But then they say that she's being put under surveillance by Dr. Michael Kilbourne, and she's like, they're like, who is that? She goes, my dentist. But, earlier she said her name was Holly from the sugar packet, so you're like, wait, for real? Like, is she being, literal here? And yes, she is. Being quite literal. She knows that's her dentist, and she goes in the bathroom and yanks out her tooth.
As you do. And again, there's a sense of, like, how uncomfortable the lone gunmen are with this world. Like, because, I mean, obviously you had, like, her gun earlier on and stuff like that, and you had, like, the sense when they found out she was psychotic, they were terrified. But, like, this is a woman who's pulled out her own tooth, and there's a sense that, like, all three of them are completely out of their depth. They have no understanding of what's happening and are completely terrified. It's kind of something very
on their faces are just, yeah.
Something endearing about it. And again, like, a lot of credit to Kim Manners for the way that he frames the shots. Like, there's a sequence earlier on where I think it's the moment where they read the name Kilbourne, but I'm not sure. But it's where they turn to look at her, and they're basically stacked one on top of each other in depth of frame, which looks absolutely beautiful. It looked fantastic in the old, like, 4:3 framing, but in widescreen it also looks great. It's just a really great sort of composition. It's like if you were doing a Lone Gunmen, like, album cover, this would be it. And I love that the episode is populated by shots like that.
Absolutely. And then I speaking of those shots, I love, when she's got her tooth out and she's like, look at it. And then you see their faces, and it's like just classic, beautiful Lone Gunmen shot of them together and completely horrified by what this not psychotic woman has done.
And again, it's one of those things that works so well because it's so absurd. As you pointed out, it's like, look at my tooth! Look at it! Which is like, it's terrifying because this is a person who's literally pulled their own tooth out with a pliers. But there's also something sort of darkly funny about the fact that, like, they pulled their own tooth out with a pliers and are trying to talk.
It's just completely bizarre and totally Vince Gilligan.
Yeah.
This is just completely something that I feel like only he can write.
Yes. And
then we find out Byers flushed it. He's like, well, I just flushed it. What else are you going to do? You just flushed it down the toilet.
Again, not very good at this. Recurring motif of the episode. It's like the one piece of evidence that we actually physically have. What should we do? Destroy it. Yeah.
Yeah, flush it down the toilet like a goldfish.
Yeah.
Ugh. So this is where we find out what actually happened at the warehouse and how we bring it back around, circle back around to find out the truth. And they find out that this chemical weapon, I guess you would call it, is in the asthma inhalers. And Mulder shows up and tries to arrest Suzanne and the Lone Gunmen, and chaos unfolds. Some men in black come up and start opening fire, and the inhalers explode, and Mulder gets it all over him and goes insane, and he turns into a psychotic for real. And then just, it's chaos. It's just madness. And who shows up but Mr. X? And it's great to see him.
It really is, isn't it? You forget how good Stephen Williams is.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've got Mulder laying on the floor, and I mean, I'm glad that they saved Shaft for later in Bad Blood, because I don't think it would have been quite as appropriate here.
Yeah. With
Stephen Williams standing over him. But yeah, that was a callback that made me think of that moment in Bad Blood for sure.
Yeah. Again, the reminder that Mulder isn't particularly good at what he does either, given the amount of times he ends up incapacitated and shouting incoherently. But he's still much, much better at it than the Lone Gunmen are, which is remarkable.
And yet, they did not end up on the ground muttering things and half naked. So, I don't know.
I guess in the end, it all
balances out. Points for Lone Gunmen here. Yeah. It ends up in about a draw, probably. So, Mulder's over here, like, hallucinating aliens and screaming incoherently, while we've got the cleanup crew and the Lone Gunmen are just standing there. I mean, I'm just guessing. I would like to hope that maybe I would have tried to run away at some point or hide instead of just stand there. I don't know. But
Sarah, like, in this situation, you just act like you own the place. Like, nobody questions you. You just act like you belong there, and nobody will challenge you. You know? Just like, I mean, Byers probably should have leaned up against the one of the boxes while people were by and said, "What's up? How's it going? Hey." Just sort of play it cool. Just be cool. I do
Which
love
they were not.
No, they were not. It's only when they draw attention to themselves that Mr. X is like, okay, I have to actually deal with this. I kind of love the idea that if the three of them had just remained silent, all the sort of conspiracy people would have cleaned everything up, would have got in the car and drove off. Mr. X would be driving in the car and he'd be like, "Wait, did I forget something?" And the three of them would just
not
be
important. Yeah.
But then Byers opens his mouth.
Oh, Byers and that mouth. I love how Mr. X looks down at Mulder and they're like, they freaking put a guy who's alive inside a body bag and drag him away. Like, these are clearly people you don't want to mess with. Like, that's intense. And so then X is like, "No one touches this man." And Byers is all, hey, that mouth. Who gives you the authority to do this?
And I think Frohickey, in his defense, realizes that this is probably not the best moment to be having this conversation again. Not because I feel like Frohickey has like a natural affinity for Byers. It's more like I happen to be standing next to Byers when this is happening and realize that there may be blowback for me.
Literally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then he's like, they're just like screaming, and Mr. X does what he has to do to scare them half to death. Not that they're not completely terrified already, but clearly Byers has like this moment of bravery, and it's beautiful and sweet, but not the time. He's and then he's like, "It's all true about Dallas and JFK." I love that they chose JFK for his name and all of that. It's a really nice tie-in. And then X, Stephen Williams, he's just brilliant. He goes, "I heard it was the Lone Gunmen." Just walks away into the night. And it's just, he plays it so well. He's great. Yep. And we've got back at the interrogation, Detective Munch. "Do I look like Geraldo to you? Don't lie to me like I'm Geraldo. I'm not Geraldo."
Which is, I think, a reference, actually, again, speaking of Gilligan's literacy, it's a reference to a line from Homicide in the Street, where it's like, "Do I look like Montel Williams? Don't lie to me like I'm Montel Williams." Like, I really like that Gilligan was like, I feel like I could reference that line and just make the reference a bit more specific to 1989.
Yes. Right. And he's just, like, spilling the beans like he is Geraldo. Like, he really is treating him like this is the Geraldo show, and I'm just gonna, like, tell my story, and, But, and then we've got him back in the jail cell, and they're arguing and fighting about what's gonna happen. They're, like, totally scared, but they need to get out of this somehow, and Byers is just so in love. Like, he's got his little heart eyes on. And, he says, "She really opened my eyes." And he's completely smitten. And that's it for him. It's over. He's just in love. So sweet. But then the detective comes back and he's like, "Well, Agent Mulder, like, pulled out of his psychotic breakdown and verified your story, so
as much as he can."
Lucky for you.
As much as he was lying naked on the ground screaming, "They're here, they're here, they're here." He was a very reliable witness.
Oh, absolutely. But he's a brilliant FBI agent.
I mean, nobody who's Oxford educated could be mistaken, right?
Exactly. I mean, clearly he was on drugs. He was drugged. And then I love the aluminum foil hat line. Yeah. That's great. Yep.
Or the little bit where he steals Frohicky's cable stealing device, which I quite like as well.
Keep that.
Yeah.
And then they overhear. Like it's not even overhearing. I mean, they're just standing there talking. Like they're not trying to keep this a secret that they found Mulder's car at the train station, and they put two and two together. Oh, and so they find Suzanne Medeski, and she's coming out of the Baltimore Guardian, and she says that they didn't believe her story. Surprise. Is anybody surprised by this? That they didn't believe this is a thing that's happening?
I mean, she'd already, unfortunately, pulled her tooth out. If she could just pull another tooth out and demonstrate to them, I mean, it would just be much easier, I think.
Too bad she only had one cavity that day.
Yeah.
But she's not going to stop. She's not going to stop Darren until she finds someone who will listen. And Byers listened to her. Sweet puppy Byers. And she's so glad that he listened to her that she gives him a kiss. Do you think that was his first kiss?
I would not be surprised by that possibility.
Let's hope for his sake, no. But, I mean, at least it was a good one.
I mean, like, it seems like if you believe this episode and the next one, Three of a Kind, it really seems like Byers, that one kiss had a very profound impact on who Byers was and what he does. I would not be surprised to discover that was Byers.
Yeah. So then we have the payphone ringing ominously. What is I didn't recognize what that payphone is. A payphone. What are those for?
Yeah. I mean, surely they could have just rung somebody's mobile.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Because everybody had one then.
Yeah.
It was just, a little bit bigger. So then, she says, no matter how paranoid you are, you're not paranoid enough. Tell the truth. Tell as many people as you can. And she runs down the street and some cars pull up and drag her into these dark, mysterious cars. And dark, mysterious Suzanne is gone with Mr. X.
Who gets two really cool exits in the space of 5 minutes in this episode.
Doesn't he, though?
Which would be like, it would be overkill with another character, but you're like, X kind of earns it. It's like that scene where he leaves them in the warehouse. That's really cool. That's like one of the great exits. And then there's a sense that the writers or X are like, well, that wasn't cool enough. How about we get a slow motion sequence where I roll down a window and just stare at them? And it's like, wow. Somehow that's even cooler, despite the fact that you've done it twice in the space of 5 minutes.
But it's so cool. It like wipes your brain memory out. It's like magical that you just totally forgot it just happened. Because he's just that cool, and it's okay. So then we've got Mulder and the Lone Gunmen at this broken down convention. Everybody's gone. They're sitting in the remnants of this convention, and Frohickey, bless, he asks if he's feeling better. Clearly their relationship has begun.
That's the real journey at the heart of the Unusual Suspects. The journey of Frohickey from a creepy, pervy cable stealer towards being a creepy, pervy cable stealer who cares about how other people feel. That's his arc, and I love it.
Yeah, this is the first time Mulder goes and asks the Lone Gunmen for the what happened story, and they give him the truth. And my favorite part about this whole episode is when they're like, the government is seeking to control us, and he goes, what?
I also quite like the bit afterwards where it's like, tell them about the Bibles. Oh, we'll get to that. It's like, we got to ration this. It's like, you got to pace. You can't just drop these in. You have to build up properly. I mean, does anybody appreciate the solid 3-act structure in storytelling? Don't get ahead of it here.
Right.
It is. It's an absolutely beautiful closing scene. It's real, and it's fun, but it's also sweet, which is the wonderful thing about it. Because it's these three people who are kind of lost and lonely, and like that's like, and part of me wonders, is Unusual Suspects kind of Gilligan playing a bit with the mythology of the show? Because Gilligan famously argued that he never wrote a mythology episode. Now, obviously, he wrote Memento Mori and was Emmy nominated for writing Memento Mori, but he's argued that, for example, he never wrote the cigarette-smoking man as a character. And it feels like this is Gilligan having his own little take on the mythology of the show, where he's kind of a bit more cynical about the mythology than I think like some of his contemporaries are. It very much reminds me a little bit of what Morgan and Wong did in the 4th season with episodes like, for example, Music of the Cigarette Smoking Man, or what Darren Morgan did in the 3rd season with Jose Chung's Better Space, where there's a sense of like a meta-conspiracy, where it's like, why... The episode is kind of interested in why do we believe the things that we believe, and it's rather than like, what are the things that we believe. And it's kind of like, there's a sense with the 1989 setting, which is the end of the Cold War, which is the moment where these views, sort of these conspiracy theories, sort of really entered the mainstream. But you have this, like, the suggestion in the episode, first of all, and I think like Dean Haglund has pointed this out, the really cynical suggestion that's buried very deeply in the episode, which is like, this episode takes place in May 1989. Mulder is sprayed with gas, and he's made to believe that there are aliens about. In fact, like, you can tell earlier in the episode, like, you see him playing with an alien detector on the floor of the convention. You know, that's where his "they're here" line comes from, which is the computer repeating the "they're here, they're here, they're here." And there's a suggestion that, like, Mulder's delusions about aliens might be rooted in this, because obviously the hypnotherapy session where he remembered that Samantha was abducted was in June 1989, which is a very pointed piece of continuity from Gilligan. And you're kind of wondering if, like, maybe the gas that he was exposed to Unusual Suspects sort of affected him or warped his memory or distorted his memory in a way that maybe when he went and did that sort of hypnotherapy session, maybe that was a distorted memory as a result of what happened here. And there's a sense that Gilligan is sort of playing with that. It's interesting that the 5th season, which I really, really like, offers no fewer than 3 possible origin stories for the X-Files. You know, and you can fit them together, but they all seem to be mutually exclusive. So here in Unusual Suspects, you have the suggestion that Mulder was gassed by, you know, that Mulder was a straight A, Oxford educated, going straight to the top of the FBI sort of like agent, up until the point he got gassed in the face during a botched raid on a sort of like a government chemical experiment. Or you have the suggestion later in the season in Travelers, which is that like Mulder happened to find the X-Files and sort of followed through and engaged with one of the earlier agents who worked on the X-Files and therefore sort of connected to them that way, retroactively. And then you have in the story in the end, which is himself and Foley sort of found the X-Files and sort of developed them themselves. And you have the show playing with its own history in that way. But like you have Gilligan wondering if like conspiracy theories and the things that we believe in and the things that we sort of engage with, are they just responses to emotional insecurities that we feel? So like Byers, like Unusual Suspects argues that like Byers was living a perfectly normal life until he met this woman. And this woman completely changed who he was and how he saw the world, and then she disappeared. And Byers has effectively been trying to make sense of the world without her. And he does this by adopting, like, again, he presents Suzanne Modesky as a martyr figure. It's like, she opened our eyes. She told me the truth. She showed me the world as it really is. And I'm going to continue on as a way of honoring her, as a way of, like, respecting her memory and who she is and what she did. And there's a sense that, like, Byers' whole, like, conspiracy theory persona is just a reaction to that trauma. And it's it feels like Gilligan is playing a little bit with like the underlying logic of the show in a way that kind of is more metaphorical or abstract than, you know, the mechanics of the mythology about colonization, about Deep Throat, about the cigarette smoking man, about X. And it's more engaged with kind of like why these stories interest us and why we believe these stories, and particularly why we tended to believe these stories in the 90s, which were a very different time, and whether they were a reaction to like trauma that we'd experienced. I find something very interesting in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, I love how it ties everything together and gives us this glimpse into the past. And like you said about Mulder, like if this was going to be, you know, the reason that he went off on this tangent of alien conspiracies and everything. But, I mean, it kind of probably already had to be in his head, like you said, with the suggestion from the other convention and all that.
They're here. Here.
Yeah. But, I mean, like, I wonder how much he had thought about that previously. Because obviously he wouldn't have visited that booth if he wasn't interested in it already. But, yeah, it's a really fun glimpse into the past and gives us a great origin story. Yeah, absolutely. So let's check in with our X-Files basement, X-Cast basement, and see what some of our listeners had to say about the episode. So Dan said, "This episode really holds a special place in my heart. I just love how the Lone Gunmen finally get an episode that focuses on them entirely. Also a great addition, giving Byers to have a love interest. And lastly, having Mr. X show up when he did was just brilliant and totally makes sense." Yes, Stan. Absolutely. And so we've got Kurt, who says, "There's a lot to love about this episode. The paranoia and conspiratorial world which unfolds in front of Byers' eyes proved to be a great choice. And rather than a 2D character already mistrustful of the government, we have someone's eyes being opened with the audience to the wider conspiracy, creating the man versus the institution story. The reappearance of X was delightful, and Mulder's hair and that phone will never be forgotten." And the subversive nature of Mulder and his would-be quest adds ambiguity to the future, which I love. Then we've got Robert, who says, "The episode is a lot of fun. I have a thing for origin stories, and to see how the Lone Gunmen came together was great on top of a real interesting story. Never get tired of the sight gag of Mulder on the ancient cell phone." And it was also great to have Mr. X back, if only for one episode. And it was a great use of slow motion as he drove past them with the window rolling up after they abducted. Yep.
It's very much a power move as well, because there's like no reason why he can't have the tinted window rolled up, except as like this'll look really cool when I'm driving by them and staring. It's a great, like, I always liked, X always seemed like he was a bit of an asshole. And I kind of admired that about him. It's like, there's no reason for me to do this other than to be a bit of an asshole, but I'm a really cool asshole, so it kind of balances out.
It's a fine line. It's a fine line between asshole and badass.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he walks it carefully. Yes. Yes, and then we've got our last comment from Chandru. "I like it now. Just a fun and interesting episode, seeing a lot of our favorite characters and their past. When it first aired, though, I was fairly new to the X-Files fandom and wanted a major Mulder and Scully episode, so I was a bit disappointed. So, this episode won them over. Yep."
Well, this is the interesting thing, because obviously the production history of this episode is worth noting. This was, I think, Duchovny and Anderson were primarily working on the film at the time. This was the first episode of the 5th season to be shot. So the reason why it's a Mulder and Scully light episode is because they were still recovering from shooting the movie in the middle of the summer, which again is a crazy, like, audacious thing to do. Imagine you're making 24 episodes of the show in a season, 20 in this season, but you're doing that and you're making like a blockbuster movie in the summer between them that you're going to release afterwards. It's absolutely insane to think that the show was doing this, and I'd actually love that Unusual Suspects is a clever and creative way of sort of getting around that. It's a way of saying, well, look, we have to make an episode of The X-Files because, like, you know, we have to air one this Friday or whatever, or in a couple of Fridays or a couple of Sundays. But we don't have access to our 2 lead actors for an extended period of time. What do? And I love that Gillian and sort of Carter ran with the idea of going, well, look, we actually have a pretty deep bench now. We have these supporting characters. Why don't we throw them into the spotlight? It's a very clever move. It's a very playful move. And it's sort of, I think it pays dividends. Now, you've had, like, earlier Skinner-centric episodes, like, for example, Avatar or Zero Sum. You've had Musings of a Cigarette Smoking Man, which focused on the cigarette smoking man. But it's kind of fun to be able to do that with the bench, to have, like, supporting characters outside of Mulder and Scully who can carry an episode in their own kind of way. Of course, like, you can debate whether or not these three characters could carry their own TV show, and I suspect we might, maybe, at some point in a couple of years. But it's great that they can carry this episode as well as they do.
Yes, yeah. I remember doing the pod watch in the summer and trying to get all that recorded, and that was just, 30-minute episodes here and there, and I didn't even do all of them, and I just can't even imagine what kind of a schedule that would have been like.
Yeah, it's like making a gigantic blockbuster movie and making 2 seasons of television. It's absolutely insane. And, like, on top of that, you have Carter's obligation to doing stuff like Millennium, although he handed over the second season of Millennium to Morgan and Wong. But that's still, like, the amount of work that the people working on the X-Files did, that 1013 did, in the 90s astounds me every time I think about it. And as you pointed out, like, we're doing a pod watch and we find it exhausting. I'm like, it's Saturday morning. I can't really get out of bed. I feel tired. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like, how hard would it be to actually do something on that scale and to organize it and to stop the wheels falling off? I mean, like, there are some bumps along the way with the film and the season 5 and the way they integrate. But, like, for the most part, considering the pressure involved, the sort of the balls in the air, the execution of it is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm in awe of it every time I think of it. And, like, the fact is, like, Unusual Suspects should be on paper a throwaway episode. It's very much, it's a bottle episode. It's we need to get something filmed, but we don't have Duchovny or Anderson. It should be like an episode that people forget, that you skip on a rewatch. And yet, in spite of that, it is, for me, a highlight of the 5th season. It's a story I absolutely love. And it's an episode that I keep coming back to. Arguably, I come back to it much more than I do Redux 1 and Redux 2. And, like, that's staggering to me. And it's a credit, I think, to everybody who worked on it.
Well, it's definitely a strong episode and a strong season. So, yeah it's good. So, well, Darren, I think that about sums it up for us. I mean, highly regarded episode, lots of fun to watch. Good times all around, I think. If you're playing the drinking game, we're not going to encourage you to drink. But
I think you'd be psychotic to do that. You'd have to drink psychotic.
Your iced tea or your root beer. Yeah. So, do you have anything in the works going on? What's going on with you, Darren?
I have a bunch of stuff. I'm not actually sure when this is coming out, so I won't be too specific. But I do a bunch of other podcasts as well. I host a podcast called The 250 with my friend Andrew Quinn, where we go through the IMDb's top 250 movies of all time. We release a new episode every sort of Saturday. And sometimes we do episodes that are new on the list, episodes that come in. So, for example, this year, movies like, for example, Into Spider-Verse or Green Book or Roma would have come in, so we talk about those. But otherwise, we talk about classic movies like Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park, even things like Andrei Rublev by Tarkovsky as well. So it's a nice varied sort of look at cinema as it is. And then I also co-host a weekly Irish film podcast, which is called the Scanon Podcast, which is a selection of very young Irish critics. We talk about the week in film. We talk about what we watched. We talk about what happened in the world of film news. And we talk about like new releases and the top 10 at the box office. And it's a forum for people who care about film. So if you like Irish accents and if you like film, that might be worth a listen as well. And my publisher would be very remiss or very angry at me if I didn't mention... No, they wouldn't. They're lovely. But I would be very angry at myself for letting the publisher down if I didn't mention that I have another book out, which is Christopher Nolan, A Critical Study of the Films, which is available and is well worth a look. It might be a little bit pricey. I openly admit that I don't set the price on it. But if you do have it, you can, or if you are interested in reading it, your local library will be able to stock it for you as well. It's like one of those things like phone books or payphones. I watch the show and I'm like, what's that? What's a library? But they do exist, and they still work, and they still do great work in the community, and they can order those in for you as well. Cheers.
Cheers. My publisher just now told me that I should mention my book, which is, self-published. So I am a publisher.
You are the publisher.
Just got word from my publisher that I need to mention my.
It came right down the line. Yeah.
Right down the line. Amazing how that happens so fast. Yeah. Have a book out, Darkness Shifting. I don't know when this will be airing, but possibly I'll have another book out by then. I hope to. Yeah. So we'll see if that happens. But check out Darkness Shifting for sure, because it's out in the world. And it's like X-Files meets King Arthur. So if you're into
nice
Skinner, you like Skinner. He's, might find one of my characters interesting.
When you say it's like the X-Files meets King Arthur, is it really just Skinner is King Arthur?
No, not quite, but yeah. So, yeah.
Nice.
It's fun. It's a fun book. I liked writing it. So, yeah. People enjoy reading it, apparently. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've been told.
I have a similar experience as well. It's like I am constantly amazed that people seem to have positive feelings about what I've written. I'm like, I just really enjoyed writing it. I feel like I'm a terrible writer like that. It's like it's great. I'm really touched. I am genuinely touched when people tell me they love it. But it's like, the important thing for me is that I enjoyed writing it. It is always great to hear feedback, and I'm always amazed because I never really think of it like that, and then I hear it, and it's genuinely moving. It is amazing.
It's cool. So yeah. So find us online. We're at the X_cast on Twitter and hanging out in the X-Files basement, the XCast podcast fan group. Guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for putting up with us.
And thank you for having me on, Sarah. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk with you, Darren. So until next time, trust no one.
The XCast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and hosted by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated team of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find the show on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the XCast, or inside our group, the X-Files Basement, an XCast podcast fan group, plus on Instagram by typing in the XFcast. If you're a fan of the show, why not support us on Patreon? Exclusive bonus episodes, early access to new episodes, plus become part of our XCast community in the Patreon department. To see our monthly subscription options, just head to patreon.com/the XCast. That's patreon.com/the XCast. We'd love to see you join our Patreon community. We're also part of the We Made This podcast network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and We Made This on Facebook. You can find a range of shows on TV, film, music, and popular culture in general on the network. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.